Greetings all. We are in for a treat on this episode for a couple of reasons. Now, firstly, if you were to ask somebody what is the oldest warship in commissioned service, everybody would know that. It's HMS Victory. If you were to ask what is the oldest warship in commissioned service afloat, USS Constitution. But if you were to ask what is the oldest armoured vehicle still in Army service, well, you might come up with a blank. We found it. The other good treat about this is hands down the most beautiful vehicle I have ever had the pleasure to cover. So we went for a twofer here. Now, I am sure to share my opinion on the beauty of the vehicle, I'm going to be joined here by a co-host, Mr. Johnny O'Connor, who was involved in the restoration of the vehicle and is going to know a heck of a lot more about this than I am. So instead of my wandering around talking about what I think I am seeing, well, we're going to know exactly what I think we're seeing. So coming around the corner and bringing them in is going to be Sliabh. All right, as promised, this is Mr. Johnny O'Connor. He was involved in the restoration of Sliabh, and I have several questions. Firstly, for our foreign audience, when we were trying to find a name for our kid, we wanted a good Irish name. And the problem we discovered was that any Irish name is totally unpronounceable to an American when you're looking at it.
Niamh.
And Niamh, Siobhan, things like that. You know,
Sliabh.
Where does the H go in Siobhan after the B?
Absolutely.
So how do you get Sliabh out of that?
Well, Sliabh is the Gaelic name for the anglicised Sliabh, which is a mountain in Tipperary. And that Sliabh actually translates to Hill of the Women. It goes back to Irish folklore, how it became, that's another story, how it became known as Hill of the Women. But this particular vehicle is Sliabh. There were various other names on vehicles. There was Knockananna, the Baby, Mutineer, the High Chief, Flying 50. All of them had a particular name depending on which side the vehicle ended up on. So the driver or the commander just chose a name for it. So somebody with a Tipperary connection obviously put Sliabh na Món on this particular vehicle.
And would I be right in saying that this is the pride of the Irish Cavalry Corps?
This, without doubt, is the jewel in the crown. This is one of only 2 surviving Rolls-Royce armoured car vehicles in the entire world. There are a few in the museums, but this is the only one actually running. There are 2 running, this one and the one in Bovington Tank Museum in England, where we brought it back in 2013. But this one is without doubt showroom condition, completely restored back in 2012. And I was very fortunate to be on the team who restored it, because we have a particular pride in this vehicle because of its connection with General Michael Collins. This car was part of his convoy when he was assassinated, and he actually took cover behind the vehicle when he received a fatal shot. So it has a particular pace. It's not just an iconic vehicle to us, it's a historically iconic vehicle as well. So to us, it's priceless.
Yeah. So technically, this is a 1920 pattern Rolls-Royce armoured car.
Yes.
So can you talk about the history of how the Rolls-Royce armoured car became the Rolls-Royce armoured car?
Absolutely. Well, it's built, we can actually thank, I think, a Lieutenant Commander Sampson, who was a Royal Naval Air Service officer in Belgium back in 1914. This predated armoured vehicles, predated armoured cars anyway. And he had a Rolls-Royce armoured vehicle himself, a Rolls-Royce armoured car, and he had access to a few different types of vehicles, but the Rolls-Royce armoured car was only strong enough to support armour plate. So they somehow acquired some armoured plating or ship plating. I think it was steel decking from Dunkirk, from a shipyard in Dunkirk, and he up-armoured, if you like, his personal Rolls-Royce. Now, there was no turret on the vehicle, but he armoured the sides of it to protect the vehicle itself, protect the radiator, protect the engine, and they fitted a Maxim gun onto this vehicle. And they used his personal vehicle for reconnaissance and for rescuing downed pilots in Belgium in the First World War. Now, so this was deemed to be a very successful, so they ordered a fleet of Rolls-Royce armoured vehicles in, because the Rolls-Royce chassis was capable of carrying the extra weight. So there are some strengthening involved. The rear chassis was strengthened, and you can see there are double wheels on the rear to support the weight, and a few other modifications. But essentially, it's a Rolls-Royce Ghost touring car, if you like, with a strengthened chassis and some extra modifications to carry the weight, including the double wheels at the rear.
And it kept the original engine?
Yes, the original engine. The original engine is a thing of beauty, as you can see. And that develops about 80 horsepower at about 2,200 revs. So quite strong, and was well able to carry the extra weight of the armour, plus the turret, of course.
So how does Sliabh na Món end up in Irish service?
Sliabh na Món was one of about 20 vehicles that the British Army operated here during the War of Independence. And then when the British left, they had 20 cars, as I said. They held on to 7, and they actually sold. Lots of people say they were handed over. Now, they were handed over, but for a small fee.
Right.
They were sold for about £2,000, I believe, at the time, which would equate to about £250,000 at the moment. So they were sold virtually for market value. And I did read it. They were handed over in about 1922. At the end of 1926, they still hadn't been paid for. So I'm not sure if they're paid for yet. So hopefully they are, or they'll want it back, you know. We're actually worried about that when we're in Bovington, that they might hold on to it because we hadn't paid the bill. So that was the first time it had left the country in 2013 to go over back to England, where it would have hailed from originally. So it saw service here. It was in O'Connell Street. It fought in O'Connell Street in Dublin.
During which war?
Pardon?
During
the War of Independence.
16? Oh, okay.
Yeah, afterwards, because this is a 1920 pattern car.
True.
So it would have been too late for 1916. Right. So in 1920 up to about 1922, it saw some action in Dublin, and then, of course, most famously as part of General Michael Collins' convoy when he was touring the forces in the south of the country, in Cork, in Bale na Bláth. That was in 22nd of August 1922 when he was assassinated, and this car was part of his convoy on the day.
How long did it remain in service afterwards?
Oh, well, this one.
Well, okay, it's officially in service still.
Well, this one you could say is officially in service, because they fired the gun when the restoration was complete. The gun was fired on the 13th of July, I think it was, in 2013. So that was, I think, the last time the gun was fired. So it was about 10 years ago. But it's still active. The gun could still be fired. But they were sold off. They were kept in various states of condition, but it became increasingly difficult to get parts for them over the years. And then in 1954, they were sold. They were sold at auction, minus the armoured bodies. The armoured bodies were removed. So the basic chassis and engines were sold at auction in 1954. And this one, of course, was kept because of its historical significance. This is chassis number 103. And as I said, there were 13 of these bought from the British. And you can see the number on the turret. This is ARR2, Armoured Rolls-Royce 2.
All right, so let's have a good look around the features of the vehicle. I mean, the first thing you're notice, of course, is the traditional Rolls-Royce radiator.
Absolutely.
Complete with the markings on the top.
Yeah, all completely restored as original.
So where do you get all the parts for it when you're restoring it?
Well, actually, everything was more or less there. The car was completely original. There were virtually no parts missing. And then through Mr. Black's contacts, the gentleman who restored it for us, or helped us restore it, he had contacts, and anything that needed to be machined or remade, he had access to that, he could do that. Because as you can imagine, it would be difficult to replace a lot of parts. But virtually everything was original on this car. Everything was complete. A few small bits and pieces we were actually manufactured ourselves, but the car was essentially complete.
And the restoration crew were serving personnel all?
A mixture, mostly serving personnel. I was a civilian then as well. I was ex-army myself, as cavalry sergeant, and the team were all within house, all in the workshops, who restored it and put it back together. How
long did it take?
It took about 6 to 8 months.
That's actually pretty quick for restoration.
Yeah. It started off towards the end of 11, and it was probably around mid 12. I think it was complete. But I'll check that for you.
Yeah. Well, we'll put up a subtitle if it's wrong. All right, so swing armoured shutters.
Yeah, these are controlled inside by the driver. Obviously, to keep the engine cool while it's driving, these would normally be held open. But then to protect the radiator, if the vehicle is under fire, the driver could close them from inside.
Okay. And I see a hand starter. So I presume there's an electrical starter on here.
Oh, there is, yeah. There's an electrical starter as well, which actually, interestingly, turns the gearbox, which turns the engine, which is slightly unusual. And it's a chain drive.
Right. So this is just an emergency backup then?
Absolutely, yeah, in case the battery runs low.
Okay.
You can see these springs, I'm not sure if I mentioned as well.
No.
The springs are strengthened, to cope with the weight. Double wheels at the back and additional springs. There's an extra leaf in the springs, I believe, to carry the extra weight. Because obviously we're very much heavier than just a normal touring car.
So the steering works on the right wheel and there's a crossbar for the other one?
Yeah, you can see, yeah. And brakes only at the rear, so you just have to be carefully. You have to drive carefully. So there's no brakes on the front and brakes on the rear.
Is this thing pretty much stuck on roads, or could you take it off the roads if you had to?
Oh, look, if you had to, but you see, as I said, these cars were built around 1914, typically for the First World War, but because of trench warfare and the quagmire that became the Western Front, they were totally unsuited for the conditions at the time. But for the desert, Palestine and Syria, that type of area, they were ideal because the ground was dry and hard. And T.E. Lawrence of Arabia, as we know him, used these during around 1917 when General Allenby was trying to retake Jerusalem. And T.E. Lawrence famously said that a Rolls was above rubies in the desert. He said great was Rolls and great was Royce, and they were worth hundreds of men in the desert.
So are the wheels special wheels? I don't remember seeing those.
That is one of the differences in the more obvious difference to identify the vehicle, if you like, from a 1914 pattern. The 1914 pattern had spoked wheels,
right,
like the old Rolls-Royce, like touring cars, had spoked wheels. The 1920 vehicle is one of the most obvious differences, has a dished metal wheel on front and rear, obviously, of course. And then you would often see pictures with you see spares on the side. Mm-hmm. You would often see doubles on the side, extra wheels. Because of the weight, you probably pick up a lot of punctures, so they tended to carry quite a lot of spare wheels.
And are these nuts actually brass?
Yeah.
They're strong enough?
Yeah, they are, yeah. There are enough of them. There are more of them.
Fair. All right, so coming around the right-hand side of the Rolls, what are we looking at?
Well, you can see what some people call running boards or trench planks or unditching planks here. These would be used for crossing short ditches. You know, if you encountered maybe a ravine or a hole in the road or a ditch, you could actually unhook these planks or dismount these planks and use them to cross, you know, minor obstacles on the roadway. And so you have your spare wheel here, side lights, and of course our Vickers gun with a protective plate here on the front. You can see our searchlight here on top, and of course the cavalry pennant, the black, red and green, and our motto, through the mud, the blood and the green fields beyond. You've probably heard that one before.
I have, and I think the Royal Tank Regiment have as well.
Okay. And
so is the searchlight battery operated, or what are the big canisters?
No, originally they were like a gas operated. I can't remember the name, but they were operated on a gas. There was some material put into it, and it gave off a vapor which lit. And you can see the number ARR2 of 13 Rolls-Royces. There were never a number 13. So when ARR1 up to ARR14, because Irish being a superstitious and suspicious nature, they never had an ARR 13. So with ARR 1 up to ARR 14. You can see some storage boxes here at the back for, you know, ammunition and equipment.
They fall out.
Yeah, this is wood.
This is all wood.
Actually,
yeah.
this is wood as well.
Yeah, this is all wood. Yeah.
I mean, looking at the back of it, it almost looks like a pickup truck.
Absolutely.
If you think about it.
Yeah. So the back part here was for carrying stowage for extra ammunition and extra fuel or whatever they needed to carry their equipment.
Okay, so I'm seeing a leaf spring, a very, very large leaf spring.
Yeah.
So that's that's not for the wheel as much as for the body.
Yeah, well, the weight, as you can see, is concentrated here in the centre with the turret on top. So the centre of gravity is probably a little more forward with the extra weight here over the centre of the vehicle, and the double wheels, of course, here to spread the weight. And as I said, brakes at the rear only, so one just has to be a little careful when driving at speed.
They were fluid brakes, right? I mean,
All hydraulic or mechanical brakes.
So you push down and
the
pedal. It's a cable.
Yes,
going
the
all the way
pedal. You're actually mechanically stopping it without much assistance, really. So you don't have servos or anything like that.
Well, it almost looks like a bump stop here. This wooden block. The axle didn't have that much range of motion, did it?
No, you wouldn't. No, it's protected. I'd say more so than anything. That if it were to get a sudden shock, you wouldn't have sort of metal to metal with the chassis, you know.
Where do you get tyres for something this old?
With great difficulty. we have, as I say, we have contacts within, particularly through James Black, and if we need tyres, we'll usually contact James and ask for a supply. As far as I know, they only make them periodically, maybe once every few years, and then there's a worldwide demand for them. Like, you know, there's obviously still quite a lot of Rolls-Royce vehicles out there.
Yeah. So looking at the back, as I say, it looks like a flatbed. I don't know if they would have ever stored anything in here, but it also looks like this is the main way in and out of the vehicle.
Absolutely, you can see a step here for access. You step on there and climb over, and then underneath here, which you cannot see from outside, but we have our fuel tank. Fuel tank is underneath here.
And it gets filled how? Through that little latch there?
From the top here, yeah.
That's a small little fill port.
Yeah, exactly. And that holds, I think, it's about 89 litres of fuel. And then that is pressurised. It's actually pressurised by the driver. There's a little hand pump on the dashboard, and that's pressurised, which forces fuel up to the carburetor.
That's only for starting, though. I mean,
that's just for starting. Once the engine starts, it'll continuously flow. And the seat inside, interestingly, is called a biscuit. Actually looks like a large biscuit, but it's actually called a biscuit, the driver's seat. It's just a seat just sitting on the floor, and you can see the various compartments here for closing to protect the crew. And we have a hatch here at the top for access, you know, if the car was buttoned down, or, you know, if
so that's not just for pulling out the machine gun or anything. That's
not necessarily, no.
Okay. All right. Well, let's climb on in, and you can show me what's inside. Oh, you get that. You get up that way, not the back.
Okay, do we see here, or?
Well, no, let's go all the way in.
We'll go in.
Put yourself in the...
Very undignified way of getting in.
I cannot wear the skirt.
All right, so a rather undignified way of getting in. But here we are. All right, so this car predates the modern convention of ignition shift switch, choke, clutch, brake, accelerator, because there's all sorts of controls on here that we're not so used to. What do they all do?
Okay, so prior to driving, we have a fuel pressure gauge here. So for starting, this has to be around 1 bar of pressure. So the driver has a hand pump here, a hand primer, which he must prime to get his fuel pressure right. So once you have about 1 bar of pressure there, then you have various controls on the ignition here. We have the governor setting, which we would normally put about halfway for starting.
And what does it do?
It controls the position of the governor in the fuel pump to allow so much fuel into the fuel pump, or governs the speed of the fuel pump rather. And here on the ignition, we can advance or retard ignition. So for starting, we normally retard ignition somewhat, and then we have
and that's how far into the cycle the spark plug cycles?
Yes.
Okay, why would you want earlier versus late?
We want it late because you could actually start the car, you could start the engine in the wrong direction. The engine could actually start in the wrong direction. So we retard ignition for starting. And then we have a control here. We have battery, or we have magneto and battery. We tend to use both systems, so you will have a much more a better chance of the vehicle starting if you have battery, or magneto and battery. So M and B is magneto and battery. So we have everything in order there. We have the mixture here set about midway. So now we have the starter button.
It's like a choke, basically.
But absolutely, yeah. We can weaken the mixture by turning it to the left, or make it stronger by turning it to the right. So we normally set it about midway.
And once you have the engine going, how much do you have to play with these controls? Or is it
it's probably dependent on the conditions outside, the weather or the conditions. If it's extremely cold, you would probably leave it run a bit stronger until the engine warmed up. But once it warms up, we would tend to set them about midway.
So the steering, I presume, is not power assisted in any way?
No. You need strong guys to steer to drive this car. You need strong arms to drive this. But when it's moving at speed, it's quite all right. It's just manoeuvring in slow positions or parking or reversing is you need lots of horsepower.
Yeah. And is it still clutch, brake, accelerator, left or right?
Yes, yeah. It's still the normal clutch. We have the brake in the centre, of course, and the accelerator here. The starter button, just mind your toe there.
Oh, right,
the starter button is actually down here, so it's actually under your left foot is the starter button.
All right. So why is this hinged? What's this?
It's that's just for access. It's just hinged for access to the clutch mechanism, and you can see the back of the gearbox when you get down there.
So I'm shorting 2,148 miles. Is that since the restoration? Can't be, surely.
No. That was probably an original clock that was left in there, and I wouldn't regard it as accurate at all. But because all of this was replaced and the clocks were just cleaned up and left as they were, so I couldn't be sure how historically accurate the reading on the clock is.
So I can't help but notice that the electrics are by Lucas.
Yes.
Which have a reputation in the car restoration world.
Prince of Darkness.
Yeah. Okay, so H, C, and S.
These are the the lights for the high beam, low beam type of thing.
And this
hand magneto. You could give that a crank to give it some extra spark. If you find it difficult to start, you could wind the crank and you get an extra spark.
And so you'd use that in conjunction with the choke? Well,
if you're having difficulty starting, you could use that.
So it's like a backup almost if your battery is low.
Yeah, exactly.
And the seat is nicely up. You had to get this reupholstered when you were
absolutely. This was completely refabricated. We just had a cushion in here before, but the guy who restored the car provided this, and he said this would have been original. This would have been the type of thing the driver sat on, which he called a biscuit. And we have our gear lever here on my right.
So it's a 4-speed, it looks like.
4-speed box, yeah.
I see 2 levers. One's presumably the parking brake.
Yes, one is the parking brake.
All right.
And to see it, looks like our visor has 3 settings. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sorry, 4 settings.
And you can open or close that as you wish. You
It's
can.
a heavy bastard.
It is.
Let's come down. There we go. Okay, once you get going, it's not bad.
That's not so bad. Yeah.
Okay, so
As you can see, your view then is very limited.
I find it interesting. Yours is higher above the steering wheel, and this one is lower. I guess they expected people not to be so high.
Yeah. Well, the driver here, I suppose it's at eye level just about.
Yeah.
So I can see the bonnet of the car. I can see the front exactly where I'm going, and then you have these little vision slots here at the side as well.
Interesting. Yours is further forward than the one on the left. I wonder why that is.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know, to be honest.
I mean, there's obviously some thinking behind it, or they wouldn't have done it. But of course, they never tell us what that is.
No. Mysteries of armoured vehicles. So will we go for a start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so back to basics.
Well, there you go.
Smooth.
Rolls Royce. All right, so now we have the engine started and they've raised the hood, or bonnet in local parlance. Let's go have a look at the machine in operation. All right, Sean, so we're looking at a Rolls-Royce engine in operation. Exposed springs, shafts, what am I looking at? What are all the various components?
You're looking at a fabulous piece of machinery, as you can see. Superb engineering, which you do not see anymore. What you're looking at is a Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost engine. It develops 80 horsepower at about 2,200 revs and is almost completely silent. It's a beautiful piece of equipment. As you can see, there are dual spark plugs, just like as in an aero engine. You would need 2 systems, both a battery and a magneto system. So we have a magneto system on here in case the battery system were to fail. So you have a backup. In an airplane, you can't afford to have one system fail. You can't get out and fix it. So ideally, you would have a backup system. So you can see both systems are running in parallel. You can have one system operating at a time, or you can have both systems running at the one time. You can see the horn up here. You can see all the copper and brass work, the intake and the exhaust manifolds. And it's in 2 banks of 3 cylinders. We have a 6-cylinder engine and 2 banks of 3. As you can see, there are 2 spark plugs per cylinder. And all of these controls can be advanced and retarded from the inside by the driver, and the mixture can be operated also by the driver. The mixture can be enriched or made lean by the driver depending on the conditions.
Okay, so on the bottom, the springs that are going up and down?
You can see all the valve springs are exposed. It's a side valve engine, so you can see all the valve springs exposed. You can see them here in operation. The inlet and exhaust valves are exposed. You can see they're all oiled, and so you can also see some oil around the engine. And it's often said, if there is no oil underneath Rolls-Royce, there is no oil in it. You know, so it's just one of those myths or legends about Rolls-Royce engines. This engine has been completely restored by Mr. James Black. We restored the engine completely. We restored the entire car completely back around 2012, and the car was stripped down completely to the chassis, and all the components were taken away. Everything was overhauled and restored, put back together.
Do you get any help from the Rolls-Royce company to do it?
Well, Mr. Black is in contact. He has lots of contacts with Rolls-Royce, so I'm sure he had lots of help. Of about 6,000, I think 6,137, but I might be wrong. 6,137 Rolls-Royces have been built. There are about 2,500 survive, and of that, 1,500 are still running. But there are only 2 running Rolls-Royces left in the world, and this being the outstanding example. David Fletcher has said that this one is by far the most outstanding version.
So I'm looking at the pistons, they're going, or the valves, I'm sorry, they're going about 1 a second. But what's the RPM that the vehicle is idling at?
At the moment it's, hang on, at the moment I'd say it's probably, now it's
off.
But typically it would take over probably about 700 revs, 700, 800 revs per minute.
So
and as I say, at 2,000 revs, about 2,200 revs, it'll develop 80 horsepower. Very nimble vehicle. We've driven this now, off the record, about 70 miles per hour. But,
well, it's on the record now.
Well, it's on the record now. but no problem getting about 60 miles per hour in it. And quite easy to drive, very easy to drive, even though your view is a little restricted, but it's quite easy to drive.
So as you were driving in, what RPMs would you have been doing?
Oh, probably a little over 1,000 revs per minute. It's quite low revving engine, but there's lots of torque. And there's a conical shaped clutch in it. It's like a cloth membrane clutch. And so it's not necessary to change gears constantly like it would be in your own car. You could put this into top gear and probably drive most of the day with it without changing gear.
So the timing belt, it's a chain. It looks like it's like almost like a.
Yeah, it's links. Yeah, it's a fan belt. Yeah, and it's made up of links. It will stretch over time, and then you can take out a link, or if it becomes damaged, you can add links to it.
What are they made of? I mean, it's metal on the inside, obviously.
Cork. It's like cork. It's cork. Yeah.
Why would he use cork?
It sort of predates rubber belts. You know, obviously the belts nowadays are all made of rubber, so these were predated until they came up with a better system.
So just having a look at the left-hand side, just as we finish the tour, I see a couple of other knobs and levers here.
Fuel taps. Yeah. This one's the oil.
Yeah. So how do you check the oil with a lever?
So what you're doing, you just open a little standpipe. You just open a little pipe, and you'll get a few drips of oil. So you have a standpipe inside in the sump, a little pipe facing upwards, and the oil level should be above this pipe. So when we open this lever, it'll allow a drop of oil to drop out. So you know that the oil onto the ground. So you'll know the oil level then is above the little pipe in the sump. If no oil drops out, it's below the level.
And is that something you do when the engine's running, when it's off?
No, when it's off. This is the fuel tap.
But the air pressure is what it controls.
Yeah. Makes sense.
You can pump on the engine with your hand primer inside. And the four positions are power pump, hand primer pump,
release,
both
or release,
or release the pressure.
All right, so the main weapon is the Vickers 303 machine gun. Little trigger at the back. Now, this is a service vehicle, so they can put a service gun on it. Fantastic. So as you've mentioned, it has fired in recent memory. Now, the turret is, as mentioned, completely hand-driven, as in no cranks, but you grab hold of these handles and you just pull the thing around. There is a turret lock on, actually there are 4 rollers. There's a turret lock on this one roller here. You can see that if you wanted to rotate it, you would undo the wing nut, and then that might be enough to spin it. It is. It's enough to spin it. But they're watching me, so I better not. To see out the optics, well, all they did was they have a small little cutout at the front for your traditional peep and blade sight. So you're looking with presumably your left eye, interestingly enough. I mean, you can do it with the right, but by default, I guess you'd use your left. And you're simply aiming with a blade iron sight out of your armoured car. There's a limited amount of traverse left and right, and for elevation, I would assume you would loosen this nut a little bit, and that will give you an amount of elevation. So you see the mountlet per se is actually simply a shield mounted maybe about 10 centimeters in front of the main turret. Now if you go up to the turret roof, so there are 2 hatches in the vehicle, one at the back we saw earlier, and the other is this extremely small one up here, which is held in place with a wing nut. Flips to the side, and you'd have to stand up sideways. I'm not even sure I could stand up sideways. My shoulders are too broad.
but you can access the lamp, which was a carbide lamp originally. Probably still is, because I don't see any electrical power connectors or anything going to that lamp. But that was your top hatch here. But obviously, as you can imagine, your way out is with everybody else at the back there. And finally, just to show it as possible, people complain that I complain about old armoured vehicles being small, too small for me at 2 meters tall to drive. Now, the backrest on this vehicle is fixed in place. The pedals are fixed in place. People in 1914 were slightly less well nourished, or 1918 were slightly less well nourished than we are today. Yet, I, in my 1.98 self, can fit in behind the steering wheel. I'm comfortable enough for all 3 pedals. The gear shift is in the right place, the steering wheel is in the right place, the backrest is in the right place. I do have to duck down just a little bit to see out the visor. But it's a Rolls Royce. They designed it for the common man. And I fit fine. The one last thing that wasn't mentioned, actually now I'm looking, is the lever here for the shutters, for the hood, the radiator protector. But otherwise, yeah, this is my happy face. I am a happy man right now. This is one of those rare privileges in this job, that if you think about the history that was created inside this vehicle, where I am sitting right now, and not only because it is such an old vehicle, as I say, the oldest in service, but the course of the country of Ireland was adjusted within a couple of meters, relatively speaking, of where I'm sitting. And this people sitting in this seat, or the seat next to me, were the ones that realised that Michael Collins was dead in the middle of an ambush. I don't know if there's any other armoured vehicle that I can think of that I've been in where such has happened. Yes, got it, USS Constitution. Yes, I've been on Aurora, where the first shot of the Russian Revolution was in 1917. But this is an armoured vehicle, it's more my line. There is a phrase that you can't have a holy grail, because once you find it, what else is there to look for? And if there is a holy grail, I think in the armoured vehicle world, this is probably as close to it as you're going to get. No, it ain't a King Tiger. It's Sliabh. Right, well, that said, let's get out and close up.
Well, that's it. I have run out of Rolls Royce to tour, which fills me with great sadness, I have to say. Sean, it has been a privilege. What's the future for Sliabh?
Well, it's been my pleasure to be part of the team who restored this iconic and historic vehicle, and it's preserved now and hopefully for future generations, and it will be on public display in the Military Museum in the Curragh for anyone who wishes to see it for the future.
And that's a public access museum. So
absolutely.
If you're visiting Dublin, you get in the taxi.
Yes, and just call ahead and make sure the museum is open, because it is involved in various displays and demonstrations during the summer. So just if you wish to see it, just contact the museum ahead and make sure it is available for viewing.
And if you want to see it running, you come down on Cav Day?
Absolutely, and you'll see it driving around the Curragh.
I've got nothing more. Hope you found it interesting and informative, and I will see you on the next one. Take care.
What you do is
Hang on a second, let me get the camera because I'm curious.
Connor, here I don't want to give anyone any wrong information, because I'll be criticised ad nauseum.
And that lever there down by your heel?
Afraid you'd ask me that.
Well, I guess now you get to put the armour back on.